The Dead Space Remake was finally released today, and I went to the store as soon as the doors opened, and I went inside, and I bought it, and I drove back home, and I just played it, and it's great. I am a huge fan of the Dead Space franchise, and I'm going to talk about the new game, the remake, right now. But before I do that, you should consider subscribing. I absolutely love survival horror games. It's one of the things that I talk about the most on this page. Survival horror games is one of the things in this world that means the most to me. I reviewed Callisto Protocol, I have some Resident Evil videos, I have some Silent Hill videos, and I'm going to talk about pretty much every new survival horror game coming out this year, so just consider subscribing. But I also do TV show discussions, trailer reactions, movie discussions, that sort of thing. For example, The Last of Us, I'm reviewing and reacting to each new episode as it airs weekly, so consider subscribing if you're interested in that as well. But anyway, enough of looking at me. I'm going to show you some gameplay, and I'm going to give you my first impressions, my first thoughts on the new Dead Space game. So this video is actually going to be part 1 of 2 of my Dead Space review. This video is going over my first impressions, my first overall reaction after having played the game for a few hours. But give me a couple days, I'm going to play through the entire game, and then I'm going to release part 2 to this video, which will be me talking about the whole game and my overall thoughts having completed it. Growing up, I absolutely loved survival horror games, and the scariest game that I have ever played was Dead Space. Dead Space horrified me. It took me so many attempts before I could even get a decent way through that original game. I played through Resident Evil games, I played through Silent Hill games, name a survival horror franchise, and I probably played through it. But when I sat down in front of the TV playing Dead Space, it was horrifying. I'd still say to this day that if I had to choose what survival horror game I thought was the scariest, it would be Dead Space, no questions asked. And it has been quite a long time since I played that original Dead Space game, and I honestly, if I'm being completely honest with you, barely remember it after the first couple hours because, like I mentioned before, it took me several attempts, so the first couple hours is what I remember the most. So this review I feel like is going to be a bit interesting because I love Dead Space the franchise, I know I love it, and I've played the beginning of it several times, but I don't remember the majority of the game that much, so this is going to be from the perspective of someone who knows they love the game and knows they especially love the first few hours, but I still have sort of this new fresh perspective on it because, again, barely remember the rest of the game. I'm going to talk about the plot first, but before I get into it, all gameplay you're seeing is from very early on in the game, so don't expect to see many spoilers here. You play as Isaac Clarke in this game, and you and your small group are sent to the Ishimura because there was a distress signal sent out. You're tasked with going there and just doing repairs. Seems like a very simple job. But as soon as you arrive there, you realize shit has gone horribly, horribly wrong. There's blood everywhere, there's dead bodies everywhere, and you realize practically everyone on the ship is dead. And then to top it off, the ship that you arrived on gets destroyed. So there's no hope for you, and the vast majority of your crew dies, and you're alone, and it's horrifying, and I love it. But also to put icing on the cake, your wife is working on the ship that you went to fix, and you're looking for your wife, hoping that she's alive, despite the fact that all you see around you is death. It's a very simple plot, but it's very, very effective because it gives you just enough plot to care about these characters, to care about your situation, to care about your tasks and what you're doing, but the plot doesn't overtake just the creepy atmosphere, the subtlety, the darkness, the quietness of going around on this ship. And speaking of quietness, this ship is horrifying. It's probably, personally for me, the scariest survival horror location because, for example, Resident Evil, you know when you leave the mansion, when you leave the police station, when you leave Raccoon City, it's the regular world out there. Evil Within, you know if you can escape where you are. Same with Silent Hill. There's a real world out there for you somewhere relatively close. But in Dead Space, you are in a ship in the middle of outer space with absolutely no way off of it, and you're surrounded by nothing but alien creatures that want to kill you. And you're completely under-equipped because Isaac Clarke isn't this warrior, he's not this soldier, he's a mechanic. and he is tasked with needing to survive and save the day. And it's, for me, it's like a perfect setup for a survival horror video game. Now I'm going to get into the gameplay. Much like the plot, the gameplay is super simple. I feel like the developers and the creators of this game found the perfect line for making the gameplay innovative and fun and not feel too dull or too simplistic, but they also didn't make it too complicated, because again, if they added too many gameplay mechanics, if they made it too complicated, it would really lessen the simple horror that this game does so well. For the most part, at least in the beginning of this game, you're doing very simplistic tasks. You have to fix the tram, you have to open a door, you have to retrieve this, you have to retrieve that. But unlike other games, it feels meaningful because it feels realistic. Again, because of who you are. Isaac Clarke is a mechanic. This is his job. He knows what to do. He is the one that needs to do these tasks in order to survive, in order to let his friends and his crewmates and those people that he cares about survive. So unlike a lot of other video games and survival horror video games, doing these types of tasks can feel very boring. It can feel like busy work. You can feel like an errand boy, but it doesn't feel like it here because, again, it's Isaac Clarke's duty and his job. And plus, just transversing along this ship, the Ishimura, is horrifying. And again, the shooting mechanics is very simplistic but very fun. And the start of the game, you have the plasma cutter and you have the pulse rifle, and god, they're so fun to use. Just as fun as they were in the original. Honestly, they're more fun than they were in the original because this game really utilizes the haptic feedback in the DualSense controller on the PlayStation 5, especially with the pulse rifle. Shooting that thing feels so meaty, so powerful in your hands, and I love it. And the monsters and the sound design for the monsters are horrifying. The noise that they make, I don't remember them sounding that way in the original Dead Space. I could be completely wrong. Let me know in the comments if I am, but it's creepy. It has this human element to it while still sounding like monster aliens. So it's like a perfect blend of something familiar and something so foreign and strange and terrifying. And the sound design for the whole game is perfect. This ship, like I mentioned earlier, is so dead. There's nothing around you but dead bodies and aliens that want to kill you. But despite the fact that Isaac is like the only living person around, it still sounds so alive. The ship, all these creepy creaks and mechanical noises while also hearing aliens just scurry around in the vents. It's freaky. And the soundtrack is so amazing. I really hope that people realize how amazing this soundtrack is because it's one of my favorite survival horror soundtracks already. 1 minute it sounds like creepy Friday the 13th-esque horror, just getting your adrenaline pumping, and then next thing you know, it's very somber and epic and just makes you feel like you're in this outer space epic sci-fi adventure, and a lot of sad notes as well. It just blends perfectly into the plot and the gameplay. Another thing that I want to mention, and this isn't a flaw, this isn't a critique, in fact I think that this was a good decision, but this game is so incredibly similar to the original that it kind of feels like I'm playing a remaster. Again, I'm not that far into it, but when it comes to the first few hours, it feels very identical. The rooms are laid out almost exactly the same. The enemies pop up in almost the exact same location. Dialogue is very similar. Cutscenes are very similar. It feels like you're truly playing that original game from 2009, just with a complete graphical overhaul. But I am noticing some changes overall so far, like some small quality of life things when it comes to animations, and of course, zero gravity stuff. And again, as I get further into the game, I have a feeling some things might be different narratively, story-wise, and there may be some chunks of the game that do feel very different. But as of right now, it reminds me a lot of The Last of Us Part 1, where it feels like you are playing that original game from 2013, but just they completely did the graphics over again. But the base game feels so similar. But don't get me wrong, this is a remake through and through. It is not a remaster. As far as I'm aware, it is built from the ground up. So again, it is a remake, not a remaster, but it's just very similar to that original. And again, this isn't a critique. I think it was the smart move because that original game is so damn good, but just something I wanted to point out. So unlike things like Resident Evil 2 to the Resident Evil 2 remake or Final Fantasy 7 to the Final Fantasy 7 remake, it doesn't feel like a brand new game with the same plot. It reminds me more of The Last of Us Part 1, or for example, Link's Awakening that came out in the Nintendo Switch, where they just recreated the exact same game, but brand new graphics and visuals. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts on the new Dead Space Remake. Again, this is only part 1 of 2 of my review. It's my first impressions, but again, consider subscribing if you liked this video, because in a couple days I'm going to release part 2, which is going to be me talking about the whole game. And again, I also do other stuff on this channel. I talk about survival horror gaming a lot. For example, one video that I know I'm going to make once I beat this game is I'm going to do a comparison between the Callisto Protocol and the Dead Space Remake. And again, I talk about other survival horror video games, and I do TV show discussions, trailer reactions, movie discussions, that sort of thing. Anyway, what are you thinking about the game so far? Let me know in the comments, but please don't spoil anything for me.